Hi, I'm Rosenberg. Welcome to my latest YouTube video and podcast. Before I begin, I want to announce my latest book. As of 2 weeks ago, the workbook for the Human Magnet Syndrome has been published. It covers the material by asking deep, provocative questions, assigning homework, giving you activities, or suggesting ways of thinking about problems so that you can fully understand the magnitude, the gravity of the Human Magnet Syndrome and all of its concepts. There's a little backstory. You might be interested in it. About 9 months ago, I was searching around the internet. Every so often, I look for people who are stealing my ideas, taking my copywritten material, my intellectual property, and either claiming it's theirs or not knowingly, perhaps ignorantly, using my material without fact-checking or checking to see if someone else came up with this information. And so I stumbled upon the Human Magnet Syndrome Workbook by some scam artist who published it on Amazon. So I contacted Amazon and I got them to pull it off, and I thought, all right, it's time to write it. So I did, and it's there for you. I highly suggest it because the Human Magnet Syndrome book is really a theoretical book. It's a conceptual book. It's an explanation book. It tells people how and why they suffer so much, why they continually pick the wrong person who feels so right, why, like a magnet, they gravitate towards, have intense chemistry with a pathological narcissist who seems beautiful, seductive, powerful, charming. As my dad once said, when the soulmate, it's falling in love with the soulmate who later becomes your soulmate. But I digress. Today I want to address a subject that was brought up in a question that was in one of my YouTube videos. As you already know, hopefully, I have this self-love recovery mailbag, and at the end of every video, I answer that question. But I've discovered that these questions are becoming the topics of the video. So instead of waiting to the end, you're going to get the question and the content for the whole video. So I'm going to read part of a comment that inspired me to do this video. Hi, Ross. I know the codependent narcissist dance is very common, but can you add a caveat that two narcissists can be in a marriage? I didn't think at first it was possible as they clash too much, but now I'm pretty sure it's more common. This was a really good question, and it addressed a 2-paragraph section of my book in the Human Magnet Syndrome and in my book, The Codependency Revolution, Fixing What Was Always Broken. I talk about exceptions. Yes, the Human Magnet Syndrome accounts for 99% of all relationships that begin by chemistry, that begin by this feeling of comfort, excitement. It's what happens when you meet someone and it feels effortless and exciting. It feels genuinely fun and easy. Versus if you don't have chemistry, it feels awkward, odd, uncomfortable, sometimes painful. The Human Magnet Syndrome accounts for this chemistry, and it explains it in many different ways. And this is not the video for me to go into it, but the most simplistic way is the inverse attraction dynamic. The opposite attract each other, like opposite magnets, the north and the south. The giver is attracted to the taker attracted to the giver. The talker is attracted to the listener, and vice versa. The strong and pushy is attracted to the passive and malleable. That is the Human Magnet Syndrome. That is the dance of the two opposite people who meet each other and immediately feel a connection. So 99% of all relationships are that way. And I've been doing this a very long time. I wrote the book in 2012. I came up with the ideas in 2010. And I don't say this to brag, but no one has disputed it because it's so factual and so easy to prove. But still, in my book, I talk about exceptions. And this is what the topic of this video is about today. It is about alpha narcissists and alpha codependents. But to first explain what the alpha narcissist and alpha codependent is, let me start off with simple definitions. Alpha narcissist is one of two narcissists that are in a relationship. This accounts for a relationship of two narcissists, which goes back to the self-love mailbag question. The alpha narcissist is the stronger one, the more controlling one, the more dominant one. perhaps the more narcissistic. The alpha codependent is the stronger one, the more dominant one, the more controlling one. Now that sounds paradoxical and maybe impossible, but it does happen. And a way to understand this intellectually is to look at my relationship compatibility continuum. That's a whole chapter in my book. And it's probably one of my favorite contributions that I've made. But essentially, it breaks down the two different personality types. The codependent who gives everything, gives all the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection, hopes that it's reciprocal, but falls in love with a pathological narcissist and gets none of it. Yet they stay in a relationship. That is the definition of a codependent. Remember that. On the other side of the continuum is the pathological narcissist who takes all of the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection, does not intend to give back or reciprocate, and has no empathy towards their partner who is empty, depleted, or saddened. So we're going to put these on a continuum, and the continuum goes from -5 to +5, and it measures the distribution of love, respect, caring, trust, and protection. On the left is someone who gives it all away, gets none. On the right is someone who takes it all. In the center is 0. And 0 is this hypothetical condition where someone gives as much love, respect, caring, trust, and protection as they take. And I call that the mythical healthy person. In this chapter, I explain that there are numbers assigned to people. So if we start at -5 and we go to 0, -5, -4, -3, 2, 1, 0, +1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so what I demonstrate is not everyone is a pathological narcissist. There are people who are selfish and self-centered that do not rise to the level of a personality disorder. +5 pathological narcissists, way out on the continuum, they have one of 3 personality disorders: borderline, narcissistic, and antisocial personality disorder. People with these personality disorders are not open to psychotherapy. They do not think they have problems. They blame other people for their problems, and they cause a lot of problems in our relationships, for that matter, our society. -5 is the codependent, or what I would call someone with self-love deficit disorder. Remember the definition. Codependent gives all the LRCTP away, wants it to be reciprocal. It's not and stays. But not everyone is what I call a chronic or pathological caregiver, someone who's self-love deficient, someone who's codependent. There are gradations. The -4 is pretty bad. The -3 is slightly dysfunctional. But the -2 is someone who gives, who likes to take care of people, who has plenty of empathy, who enjoys being generous, who enjoys listening. But because they're closer to 0, they also want and demand some level of reciprocity. I call this normal. And on the other side of the continuum, if you're a +2, that means, well, you talk a lot about yourself. You love yourself a lot. You sometimes talk more than you should about yourself. But you also can listen. You also can have empathy. You also can respond well to boundaries. Just as the -2 caregiving person can respond well to boundaries, such as, why do you have to listen so much? Why are you always thinking about other people? The -2 will go, oh yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. The +2 can also take feedback about their self, their more mildly narcissistic personality traits. What I didn't want to do, and what I am adamantly opposed to, is people looking at the two sides of the continuum as the narcissist side and the codependent side. It is not that. It is the caregiving side and the care needing side. Represents the distribution of LRCTP. Okay, so you got me. That is my relationship compatibility continuum idea. what makes that theory fit in with the larger Human Magnet Syndrome explanation is the math works out. And it's funny because I came up with this idea and I really suck at math. I probably have an 8th grade education in math. I am really good all the way up to fractions and percentages and decimals. But after that, forget about it. Well, good thing I could do that because that's all this theory needed was just simple math. To establish a relationship that is compatible, a relationship that has chemistry. Remember, compatibility is opposite attractions, inverse opposite attractions. It's like the north and the south magnet. Boom. So if someone is compatible, there has to be a zero quotient. In other words, if you add the relationship continuum variables, those numbers, -5, with the other person's relationship compatibility variable, +5, you get 0. That means it's compatible, but in this case, it's dysfunctionally compatible. It means the relationship is likely going to be stable, but dysfunctionally stable. And the other side of this idea is healthy compatibility, a -2 and a +2. Two individuals that have self-love, one's more oriented towards taking care of others, one's more oriented towards their self, but together they match up, they equal out. Now that you have the relationship compatibility theory explained, you understand the continuum and you understand how we put people on the continuum. And an understanding that a person's RCV, relationship compatibility variable, indicates their comfort level with the distribution of LRCTP in a relationship. So if you have a -5 and a -5 together, two SLDs, two self-love deficient people, two codependent people, there's not going to be chemistry. It's going to feel awkward. Sometimes when I used to do professional trainings, I would tell jokes and I would say to a room full of therapists who are largely on the caretaking side, not saying they're codependent, but more on the caretaking side on my relationship compatibility continuum, I would say, well, let's pretend there's 4 people who go to lunch. And I did this right before lunchtime, and they're all codependent. What do you think happens when someone says, where do you want to go for lunch? And they all kind of laughed because they knew it, because they all probably were on somewhere closer to the codependent side. And they knew what I meant, that no one can make a decision. Everyone defers to the other person. Everyone in this group who are codependent are so used to someone else taking control. And so it spirals. And what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And then I said, what happens if a narcissist joins the group? And I said, you go to lunch where they want to go. And no one says anything. And everyone's pretty upset about it. So the point is, a person's relationship compatibility variable needs to be inversely opposite for dysfunctional stability. But there are exceptions. And that is what this video is about. It took me a while to get there, but there are exceptions. There could be a relationship where you have a really big family and there's 3 brother-in-laws who go out fishing and they all happen to be on the narcissistic side. And they're going out fishing and they're having fun. They're doing what they love to do. Incidentally, their partner's at home taking care of everything and they don't have a lot of empathy about that, because we're talking about pathological narcissists. But here is where I introduce the term the Alpha Narcissist. The Alpha Narcissist is the narcissist who has the most control over the relationship comprised of people who are on the narcissistic, selfish, self-centered, entitled side of my continuum. So you got 3 narcissists together and they want to decide where to go to dinner. If the 3 narcissists all have a personality disorder, the person who is the strongest, the most controlling, the most dominant, the Alpha Narcissist, is going to control and dominate that relationship. Or what about the relationship where there is the +5 brother-in-law and the 2 brother-in-laws that are +4? The +4 brother-in-laws are still deeply narcissistic. It's pathological. But their narcissistic presentation might not rise to the level of a diagnosis of a personality disorder. But because they're a +4, it's dysfunctional and hurtful, and in their relationships, they need all the LRCTP, and they don't really give much in return. So when you get a group of 3 narcissists, and one's a +5, and the other 2 are +4s, the alpha narcissist is going to dominate. This is the explanation to the question that someone presented in our self-love recovery mailbag. What happens if there are 2 people who are narcissists, and how does that relationship work? The first thing I want to say is the Human Magnet Syndrome principles don't really apply in that there is opposite compatibility. It's not common, it's not natural for 2 narcissists to fall in love with each other, to get married, or to be a part of a long-term committed relationship. It is rare. It does not happen. But there are exceptions. And some of the exceptions are if you come from a culture, a religious background that believes in arranged marriage. If you come from a highly religious background and there's a teen pregnancy, and the teens, the future mom and the dad, are both narcissists, and all they were doing was just having a fun time, goofing around and being young and silly and not very smart, and did not use protected sex, and boom, there's a baby. Because of how they are controlled by their religious beliefs or the fear of their parents' religious beliefs, they agree to getting married so that there is not huge discomfort, anger, a crisis in the family. So in that case, you got 2 narcissists, or for that matter, 2 codependents. It could be a financial situation. I've seen this happen before, where someone is codependent, severely codependent on a -5. And remember, there are levels of pathological caretaking. So you can have a -5 codependent who never learned how to take care of themselves, always found out that if they suggested something that the other person in a relationship, in a family, or a work environment wanted, they were shot down. They immediately would have to back down, defer, and pretend to be in agreement. This is the plight of a person who's got a serious case of self-love deficit disorder. There are levels of pathology, even at the extremes, the -5s and the +5s. For example, a +5 narcissistic personality disorder. There are worse cases of antisocial personality disorder. You can argue that would be a serial killer. And at the best, and I quote that, would be a white-collar money launderer. Both have ASPD, both are +5s. So now that we understand that people on the other side who give the LRCTP away and don't expect to get it back, and we understand the gradations of it, put together 2 codependents. One codependent who was brought up in extreme poverty, and because of all sorts of circumstances, they graduated high school, got a good job, and became a productive citizen. And they meet someone who is very wealthy, but also is a codependent. This codependent who comes from a family of poverty, of neglect, of suffering, she, and we'll call her a she, it could be a he or a they for that matter, she has had very bad luck in dating. She doesn't like to go on the dating apps. She doesn't go out to meet people. She doesn't really socialize at work. She just goes home, eats dinner, opens up a bottle of wine, and watches TV, and lives her life as a very lonely SLD in a lot of pain. So she meets someone who is wealthy, who has a really nice personality, who likes to take care of other people, who is generous, but not a narcissist. This is an example of the alpha codependent. There are two SLDs in a relationship. One is much more pathologically codependent, pathologically self-love deficient. The other has more self-esteem, but in comparison to a healthy person, not that great. But in comparison to the more severe SLD, better. So in this relationship, the person who has a background of poverty will give up the dream of falling in love with Prince Charming, Princess Charming, their fantasy lover, perfect partner. They give that up and they go for safety. And they convince themselves they are in love with this giving, generous, wealthy partner who happens to be codependent also, an SLD. And they give up on the chemistry, much like the person who's in an arranged marriage. Well, they didn't give up on it. They just didn't have a choice. They have to make do with what they got, and they try to make the relationship work. These relationships often devolve into sibling-like relationships, feeling of sibling or best friend. And they often don't really last because one or both of them get lonely and they crave the excitement, the type of excitement that could only be delivered with a narcissist lover. So the alpha codependent, the alpha SLD, is the person who is closer to zero. They're going to have more self-esteem. They're going to have more confidence. Now, we are talking about two people that don't have a lot of self-esteem and not a lot of confidence, but one's going to have more. And that person is going to be the leader in the relationship, and that's the alpha codependent, the alpha SLD. And in the narcissist, the alpha narcissist is the one who is higher on the continuum, who has a LRCTP distribution of +5 and has a much deeper pathological presentation. Now let me circle back to the comment that I read at the beginning of this video. What happens if there's two narcissists in a marriage? It can't happen. Well, it doesn't prove the human magnet syndrome is wrong. No, it doesn't. Because there still is some level of opposite compatibility, because we're looking at the person who has a higher LRCTP, for lack of better words, rating, is in control. And if we look at the alpha codependent or the alpha SLD, the person with the higher LRCTP relationship compatibility variable controls the relationship. So these relationships are not stable. They often do not last. There often is a lot of conflict. On the side of the narcissist, there's tons of conflict. There's arguments. Of course, at the end of the day, the alpha narcissist wins. On the side of the alpha codependent or the alpha SLD, there might not be a lot of arguments. Remember, they're SLDs. But there's going to be hard feelings. There's going to be hurt feelings. And the person who is less dominant is going to have feelings of being pushed around or maybe manipulated, but won't say anything. It, in the long term, is not a stable relationship, because if that person who comes from a background of poverty should meet someone who is a pathological narcissist, say at a work event, and say they start talking, and then boom, there's chemistry, well, that will usually be the end of the relationship. They will break off with the fellow SLD and go with the narcissist who is charming, seductive, smart, likable, all of these narcissistic traits that present positively in the beginning, but eventually are negative. And that will be the beginning of a traditional human magnet syndrome opposite balance relationship. In the case of the alpha narcissist, two narcissists are going to have a lot of conflict. The beta narcissist, that would be the secondary, and I didn't mention it earlier, the secondary codependent is the beta codependent. But the beta narcissist, what happens if they go to a sporting event and sit next to a charming, seductive, beautiful codependent who listens to them and hangs on every word like it's the most important discussion that they ever had? The SLD narcissist matchup. Well, that's going to open up this experience of chemistry, and that relationship comprised of the alpha and the beta narcissist will fall apart. So these relationships are not stable. And should they resist all of the system's influences, the Human Magnet Syndrome opposite magnetic influences, then going to be, at the end of the day, a life that was very unhappy, a life that was never completely realized or fulfilled. In my explanation is what happens if there's two codependents in a relationship. I hope that helped you understand how the Human Magnet Syndrome does explain opposite attraction, but it can also explain the exception of similar personalities in a relationship. Why does that happen? And how does it work according to a power differential? And how does it create some level of family systems comfort? And I have videos about that if you're interested in it. I hope this explanation was helpful. And if you want more information about this or any other topic that I specialize in, go to my website at selfloverecovery.com. You'll see most of everything I do. Get an idea of the services I provide and the educational products I created to help you that go beyond these YouTube videos. You'll also find out about my Patreon subscription program, where you can get exclusive content. You can learn about things that I'm doing, ideas that are coming to me, bits of information that I only share with my Patreon subscription members. And lastly, let me know if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. So let me end with the invitation of the next Self-Love Recovery mailbag question. Leave it in the description if it's a YouTube video, or if you're listening to this on my podcast, send it to us at selfloverecovery.com. Be well, take care, and don't ever forget, it's never too late to be the person you should have been.